Okay, so in this video we're going to be covering pivot points, and I'm going to go over this new update and explain how you can utilize this, especially if you're having trouble with market structure, identifying the impulses, the retracements in the market. So to go ahead and do this, I'm going to go ahead and turn off some of these other settings here, put this in silent mode, and we'll go ahead and cover pivot points. So as we can see, we actually have these little boxes that pop up here, and what these are useful for is helping you identify market structure. So when we're using one of the tools that we like to use, which is the Fibonacci retracement tool, we like to go ahead and draw this from the previous high to the low, which is the start of that most recent impulse. And it really depends on obviously what type of structure you're looking at. If you're looking at micro market structure or macro, for those of you that are brand new and you have no idea what I'm talking about, no worries. Make sure that you take advantage of the training that comes along with Smart Candles. So here's the last pivot point. This is where I would start my Fibonacci retracement tool, drag it down to this actually most recent pivot point or the most recent low. You're not always going to have this box pop up. You will have it pop up quite a bit, but when it doesn't, you just drag this to the low. We come into this ideal zone. These are not entry confirmations. I'm not going to wait for this to pop up to enter. I'm going to have my ideal zone identified, and then maybe I can use Smart Candles to actually figure out if I want to sell the actual entry confirmation, which it went off there. That would have been the entry confirmation. We see the candle turned red. That's a sell notification. And we let this play out. We end up going towards that first area. This would have been like take profit area number 1. And obviously, when you guys are using these notifications, it is helpful to be able to understand how to do a multi-time frame analysis. This trade did eventually work out. Obviously, it went to the profit, went into a bit of drawdown, etc. But talking about pivot points specifically, they can help you identify that market structure. Here's another example as well. I'm going to go ahead and lock this. So we have this move here. We have an impulse. We have a retracement. We have an impulse to the upside now that breaks this current structure. We have a retracement. We have an impulse. So if I actually label this, we can see how these line up with market structure. We have higher highs. Higher high, higher low, higher low here as well. So if I actually look at this, I can actually use this to help support me drawing my Fibonacci tool. So I go ahead and take this from pivot point to pivot point. We come down to the 79. We have a reaction. We have the next setup right here. Take this from pivot to pivot. Now, you won't always have a pivot point show up. So in that case, I would just take it to the high. And then we come down into the 50%, have a reaction, and we go from there. So again, this is going to be useful if you're having trouble identifying market structure or you're unsure. This is an additional tool to help you identify those movements. And you can actually adjust this as well. Before we do that, let's go ahead and look at a few more examples as well. So here's actually where the last pivot point stemmed from. Down here would be the lowest point. We came up into the 62. Now this trade, if you were going for this low here, that one didn't work out. So here's an example of a failed setup, which is going to happen. You're not going to have a 100% win ratio with every type of setup, but just so you know, this doesn't necessarily replace your skill or your ability to identify shifts in market structure on lower time frames, etc. It's just something to help you out. So for example, here is, if I were to look at this micro market structure, here's a low that's formed, here's a retracement, we come to 62, and then we drop there, right? So that setup right there wasn't necessarily formed by using just pivot points. You needed to have a bit more information on your end, a bit more skill to catch that. But if you actually knew what we were doing here, you can see that this pivot point right here lines up with this market structure. And like I said, you're not always going to have this pop up here at the bottom. You got to kind of follow the market, and as it's printing, here's the low. Here's the retracement. We come into the 62, we drop from there, right? And then you'll have sometimes like, look, all right, this is just very clear, it makes sense. Here's the start, here's the end, and I'm looking at this move right here. We retrace up into the 79. We actually eventually have this pop up. We're not waiting for this to pop up to enter our trade. We don't need this. We're looking for confirmations to sell here in this zone. So that could be using a multi-time frame analysis in this area, going to a 30-minute, looking for a sell notification. That could be us just having this price point identified, taking the trade somewhere in this zone, and simply using smart candles as a form of confirmation that the trade is continuing. The trend is continuing, okay? All right, so along with being able to help you identify market structure, you can adjust this as well. So right now it's on period 7, which 5 is actually going to be that period where you're going to be able to go ahead and get every single movement identified. It's going to be a little bit more sensitive, right? If that's too noisy for you, you could definitely go ahead and adjust that as well and make it higher. So a common period is 10. 10 is a common period for pivot points. And you can see we have them, they're less frequent, right? So when they do happen though, here's the low. We actually did have one pop up here as well. Came up, there's the 79. This is actually a specific setup that we look for if you're in some of the more advanced programs that we offer. Now at this point, I could go ahead and just wait for this to go off for the sell. Ideally, if I was doing that, I would want to be in an area that makes sense. Like I could see this trade being a bit longer, but if not, being in this area here, I can go down to the 30-minute. I'm not waiting for this pivot point to show up to take the trade. I can go down, find my price action on lower time frames. Okay, so that concludes this update. This is adjustable. 5 is a really good setting to kind of mark the stronger impulses and retracements. 10 is very common for pivot points. Anything between that, you can adjust it to your eyes and what makes sense for the analysis that you're doing on your charts.